in the heart of Middle-earth, nestled deep within the encircling mountains, lay the city of Gondolin, a city so breathtaking in its beauty that it was said to be a reflection of the very stars themselves. The elves, ever so wise and discerning, had crafted a home of shimmering white towers, hidden gardens, and pristine waters, all veiled from the eyes of the world by a powerful spell of secrecy. Gondolin was their sanctuary, a place untouched by time, where the clamor of war seemed a distant memory. To the elves, it was more than just a city. It was a symbol of their grandeur, their might, and their eternal beauty. Yet within its walls, as in all things, there was a subtle truth. Gondolin, though a marvel, was no less fragile than the fleeting nature of peace itself. The city's existence, though hidden by magic and maintained by the ingenuity of the elven craftsmen, became the very thing that would seal its fate. Gondolin, a bastion of light in a world darkened by the shadows of Morgoth, stood as a beacon to all those who would seek it. And though it was believed to be untouchable, even in its isolated splendor, the winds of change had begun to stir. Far beyond its walls, the forces of Morgoth were quietly gathering, their corruption stretching ever closer, drawn not only to Gondolin's beauty, but to its very existence. The fall of Gondolin was inevitable, but no one, least of all its inhabitants, could have foreseen the manner in which it would come to pass. As the shadows lengthened and whispers of Morgoth's growing power spread, the elves remained blissfully ignorant of the peril drawing near. They had forgotten the cost of peace, the vigilance that it demanded. The great city, so perfect in its design, had grown complacent. The elves, proud of their impenetrable walls and their isolation, allowed themselves to dismiss the warnings that had begun to circle like crows on the wind. It was said that Gondolin would stand forever, untouched by the ravages of time or war. Yet, as the elves reveled in the splendor of their creation, an insidious danger moved ever closer, unseen and silent. The first signs of this danger came not with the sound of war drums or the march of armies. No, it came with whispers, quiet murmurs in the night, carried by the wind from the farthest corners of the world. The first sign was a feeling, a deep, gnawing unease that settled over the city, unnoticed by most, but growing steadily in the hearts of the wise. They could sense it, the approaching darkness. The walls of Gondolin may have been impenetrable, but the corruption of Morgoth was like a creeping fog, seeping into the very air they breathed. The first true sign came when Gondolin's gates were left unguarded, and its defenses slackened in the belief that no enemy could ever breach its walls. And so it was that the first betrayal was whispered into the quiet corners of Gondolin. Errol, the dark elf, a figure whose name would later stain the memory of Gondolin, became the harbinger of its doom. He, like many others, had been drawn to the city, not out of love for its people or its ideals, but for what it symbolized, its unassailable strength. Errol's treachery was not born of a simple desire for power. It was born from something far darker. His heart was twisted by envy, by the desire to see all that was pure and unyielding brought low. He knew that Gondolin's fall would be the key to unraveling the very fabric of the elves' legacy. As the city's defenders basked in the false security of their isolation, they failed to recognize the danger stirring beneath their feet. The signs had been ignored. Whispers from the wilds, strange creatures spotted at the edges of their borders, and dark dreams that filled the minds of the wisest among them. They dismissed these omens as mere superstition, nothing more than the trickery of fear. But Morgoth's forces, drawn to the light that Gondolin cast, had already begun their quiet invasion, and it was only a matter of time before their treason would be realized. Beneath the veil of secrecy, Gondolin's greatest strength, its impenetrability, became its greatest weakness. The city's very isolation, so carefully preserved by Turgon and his people, became a beacon for Morgoth's spies, and Errol, with his dark heart and treacherous hand, would be the one to open the door. The first cracks began to form when Gondolin's hidden existence was betrayed to Morgoth. The city, once a sanctuary from the world's chaos, became a target for a malevolent power that sought to see all light extinguished. And with this betrayal, Gondolin's fate was sealed. Now, as the elves turned their gaze inward, a sense of dread began to settle over the city, for they could no longer ignore the storm that had gathered beyond their walls. The age-old myth of invulnerability was shattered, and Gondolin, in all its beauty, stood on the precipice of destruction. The city's defenders could feel the weight of their arrogance, the folly of their belief that no harm could ever come to them. But the darkness that had quietly encroached upon the city could no longer be ignored. The enemy was inside, and soon the gates would open to a force far greater than any the elves had ever faced. And so, as the first betrayal echoed through Gondolin's marble halls, the city's fate hung in the balance, teetering between the fading light of hope and the inevitable dark storm that would soon engulf it all. The city of Gondolin, resplendent and strong, would soon become a battlefield where the greatest of elvenkind would fall. The walls of stone, once impervious to time, would crumble beneath the weight of their own pride and the treachery of those within. What was once a place of eternal beauty would soon be consumed by fire and shadow. And in the end, the question remained: what was truly destroyed in Gondolin? Was it just the city's physical form, or was it something deeper, the very spirit of the elves, their ideals, and the lasting legacy of their once immortal civilization? Turgon, the king of Gondolin, stood at the pinnacle of his city, looking out over the gleaming white towers and spires that had been forged with the hands of the most skilled elven craftsmen. He had watched his people build this city, piece by piece, stone by stone, Each wall, each arch, each perfect garden was a testament to their devotion, their might, and their ingenuity. To him, Gondolin was more than just a city. It was the soul of the elven race, a shining light that defied the darkness spreading across Middle-earth. It was invulnerable, protected not only by the mountains that encircled it, but also by the magic that hid it from the eyes of all who would seek to destroy it. He believed with all his heart that Gondolin would stand forever, untouched by the hands of time and evil. But even in this perfect city, cracks began to form, cracks that were invisible to the eye, but deeply felt. Turgon, wise and resolute as he was, could not see the slow decay that had begun to creep through his kingdom. His heart was too bound to the idea of Gondolin's invulnerability. He was blinded by his belief in the city's perfection, and this blindness would be the city's undoing. At the heart of this growing tension stood Mieglin, Turgon's nephew, a troubled soul whose heart was torn between love and hatred. He had long struggled with his place in Gondolin, feeling out of place in a city that represented everything he could never truly be a part of. Mieglin had been born of both elven nobility and the darkness of Errol. The dark elf, his bloodline, was both a source of pride and a curse. His bitterness simmered beneath the surface, a quiet resentment that festered over the years. Mieglin's longing to escape his inner turmoil turned into something far darker. He grew envious of his uncle's power and the respect that Turgon commanded. Though he sought to prove his worth, his heart was corrupted by a desire for control, a desire for power that made him susceptible to Morgoth's whispers. It was not long before Mieglin found himself a pawn in Morgoth's grand scheme. Through subtle manipulation, he was drawn into the web of deceit and treachery that would bring Gondolin to its knees. As Mieglin's soul darkened, his fate became tied to that of the city, and the treason that would one day destroy it took root. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of Gondolin, the growing threat of Morgoth's forces became impossible to ignore. The elves had long held faith in their city's defenses, but even the most vigilant sentries could not prevent the mounting signs of war that were spreading across the land. The rumors of a great power gathering in the east, of an enemy unlike any the world had seen, were dismissed as exaggerations until it was almost too late. The city's gates, once thought impenetrable, had been tested by 1,000 battles in the minds of the elven warriors. They had drilled, practiced, and honed their skills for years, believing that nothing would ever truly threaten them. Yet, with each passing day, the shadows of war drew nearer, and the air in Gondolin grew thick with unease. Something was coming, and it would not be easily repelled. In the dark recesses of Morgoth's realm, the Balrog, Gothmog, stirred. Born from the deepest, most corrupted fires of the world, Gothmog was not merely a force of destruction. He was an embodiment of the very darkness that Morgoth sought to spread across His presence was enough to send even the bravest hearts into a state of terror. Gothmog's forces, a terrifying host of shadow, flame, and fury, began to move towards Gondolin. Though the city had long been protected by its isolation, it now stood exposed. The long simmering tensions between Gondolin's inhabitants, both internal and external, began to reveal themselves. The cracks that had once been hidden now widened, and the enemy, once distant, was now within reach. As the forces of Morgoth drew closer, the city's defenders were tested. The once steadfast elves, who had known no true enemy for so long, struggled to believe that the end was near. Some whispered that the city would fall to an unseen force. Others believed that betrayal had already struck at the heart of their people. Their confidence, once unshakable, now wavered as shadows moved within their own ranks, and the walls of Gondolin no longer felt as impenetrable as they once had. The Balrog, with his unrelenting fire, was an unstoppable force that none could resist. As the siege began, the defenses of Gondolin were tested in ways no one could have foreseen. The great gates, once thought to be the city's greatest strength, became the first casualty of war. Gothmog's flames consumed everything in their path. The banners of Gondolin, once unfurled in pride, were soon torn and trampled beneath the weight of the enemy's advance. The city, once a shining light in the darkness, now stood on the precipice of destruction. The realization came too late. The true nature of Gondolin's vulnerability lay not just in the power of Morgoth's armies, but in the very heart of its people. The internal struggles, the mistrust, the isolationist policies that had kept Gondolin safe for so long were now its greatest weaknesses. The city that had stood untouched for centuries was crumbling from within, and no one could stop the impending storm. The city's downfall was not just the result of an enemy outside its gates, but of the fractures that had long been ignored. And now, as the forces of darkness gathered, the elves of Gondolin could only watch as the last bastion of their kind began to fall. The mystery of Gondolin's vulnerability had unfolded, but it was too late to turn back. The traitors' actions, the blind belief in invulnerability, and the ever-growing shadow of Morgoth's power had brought the city to the edge of ruin. All that remained was the battle ahead, a battle that would determine the fate of Gondolin and the future of Middle-earth itself. The city of Gondolin, with its shining towers and noble ideals, had come to a crossroads. Its defenders, led by the wise but blinded Turgon, were forced to face the growing shadow of Morgoth's forces. The treachery of Mieglin, his heart twisted by envy and darkness, sealed the city's fate, and with the arrival of Gothmog, the Balrog, the city stood on the brink of destruction. All the while, the true cost of Gondolin's isolationism, internal conflict, and misplaced faith in its invulnerability became painfully clear. as the elves prepared for the coming battle. They could not know that the true war had already begun, one that would leave Gondolin broken and forever changed. The city of Gondolin lay in ruins, its once proud towers now nothing more than crumbling piles of ash and shattered stone. The fires that had ravaged its heart had scorched everything in their path, leaving behind only the memory of a place that had been, until moments before, a beacon of hope and perfection. The wind carried the scent of smoke and death, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. What was once a sanctuary for the elves, a symbol of their might and their undying beauty, now stood as a shattered testament to their fallibility. The survivors, those few who had escaped the blaze, wandered the scorched earth in a daze, as if unable to grasp the enormity of what had been lost. They had fled, but their hearts were heavy, weighed down by the knowledge that nothing could ever be the same again. Gondolin was no more, and with it, the light that had once illuminated the hope of elvenkind had been extinguished. The survivors found themselves not only mourning the loss of their home, but also carrying a profound burden of guilt. How had it come to this? How had they failed to protect the city, the very symbol of their strength? The echoes of their defeat reverberated in every corner of Middle-earth, a sound of disillusionment and sorrow. The city's downfall had not been the result of an outside force alone. It had been the culmination of internal weakness, a complacency born from a false belief in their invulnerability. Gondolin's destruction was a result of the very arrogance that had once made it so proud. Now, scattered and broken, the elves of Gondolin faced not just the physical toll of the city's loss, but the emotional and spiritual toll as well. They had lost more than just buildings and lives. They had lost the hope that Gondolin had represented. It had been a city that stood as a shining example of elven culture and civilization, a place where beauty and strength were intertwined. Now that vision lay in ruin. The survivors were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, to rebuild from the ashes of what had been, though none could say how or where they would begin. The pain was too fresh, too raw. They had not only lost their home, they had lost their place in Middle-earth. The destruction of Gondolin sent shockwaves throughout Middle-earth, its impact rippling far beyond the elven realm. The city's fall marked the beginning of the end for the elves' dominance over the lands. The ancient power that they had once held was fading, and with it, their ability to resist the ever-growing influence of Morgoth. The world was changing, and the elves had not been able to withstand the forces of darkness that had risen against them. Their kingdom was lost, and in its place, a shadow stretched over the world, threatening to engulf all that they had once held dear. In the wake of Gondolin's fall, the survivors were forced to confront the grim reality of their situation. They had witnessed the annihilation of their city, and they were left to grapple pain of seeing their people, their culture, and their legacy reduced to rubble would be something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. And yet, even as they mourned the loss of their home, they knew that their journey was not over. They had survived, and though their spirits were broken, there was still a glimmer of hope deep within them. But how could they go on? How could they move forward when everything they had fought for was gone? As the survivors scattered across the world, the weight of their loss remained with them. The destruction of Gondolin had changed the course of Middle-earth's history, and it was impossible to know what would come next. The elves had once ruled over the lands, their light shining brightly for all to see. But now, that light was fading. The darkness was rising, and the elves were no longer the invincible force they once believed themselves to be. They had been humbled, broken by their own pride, and their failure to protect the city they had cherished above all else. The road ahead was uncertain, and the future of Middle-earth seemed more perilous than ever before. The fall of Gondolin was not merely the loss of a city. It was the beginning of the unraveling of elven strength in Middle-earth. The city's destruction sent shockwaves through the world, its impact far greater than any battle or single defeat. The elves, once the dominant force in Middle-earth, now found themselves scattered and weak, their once immense power diminished. Gondolin had been their last great stronghold, the final bastion of elven glory, and with its fall, they had lost their place at the center of the world. But the destruction of Gondolin did not just signal the end of elven dominance. It set the stage for the rise of new powers, forces that would shape the coming ages. The fall of Gondolin was intricately linked to the rise of Sauron, Morgoth's former lieutenant, who would soon begin his own dark reign over Middle-earth. With the elves weakened and divided, Sauron's influence would grow unchecked, and the balance of power in Middle-earth would shift irreparably. The remnants of Gondolin's people, scattered across the lands, would play pivotal roles in the events that followed. Some would fall to the darkness, consumed by grief and despair. Others would rise, their spirits unbroken, determined to carry on the legacy of their fallen city. The heroes and villains of the coming ages would emerge from the ashes of Gondolin, their fates forever intertwined with the city's destruction. As the winds of change swept across Middle-earth, the fall of Gondolin would be remembered not just as a tragedy, but as the moment that set in motion the great struggles that would define the future of the world. The One Ring, Sauron's greatest weapon, would be forged in the wake of Gondolin's destruction. The events that followed would forever alter the course of history, and the legacy of the elves, now dimmed, would continue to shape the destiny of Middle-earth. The echoes of Gondolin's fall would be heard for ages to come. The fall of Gondolin, though a tragic and heartbreaking event, left behind a legacy that would endure through the ages. The city may have been lost, but the memory of its beauty its ideals, and the sacrifices made by its people would never fade. The survivors, though broken by the destruction of their home, carried with them the knowledge of what had been, and the hope that someday the light of Gondolin would be rekindled. The story of Gondolin's fall, though one of sorrow and loss, was also one of defiance. The elves may have lost their home, but they had not lost their spirit. As the elves of Gondolin scattered into the unknown, they knew that the road ahead would be filled with darkness and uncertainty. Yet even in the face of this, there was a glimmer of hope. For Gondolin had not been destroyed in vain. Its memory would live on in the hearts of those who survived, and through them, the ideals of Gondolin, the ideals of light, unity, and resilience would endure. And though the city was lost, the fight against the darkness was far from over. The fall of Gondolin was not the end,